President Muhammadu Buhari has once again set up a fresh committee to look into the demands of the Academic Staff Union of Universities. This was disclosed by Education Minister Adamu Adamu at a meeting with pro-chancellors and vice-chancellors of universities in Abuja today. The new committee is coming on the heels of previous committees that have been unable to resolve the crisis. The Minister of Education, Adamu Adamu, also announced that the government will revisit its decision not to pay the striking university lecturers who have been at home for 7 months.
I call you today not to share with you my anguish, but to share with you the details of what we have done and what remains to be done. And certainly a lot remains to be done. And for very different reasons, the current position of government and ASU on the future of negotiations seems to have coincided. For me, this is a position I would have wanted us to reach after an amicable resolution of all the issues contained in the 2009 agreement. It appears that we are running ahead of the negotiations, but not for the right reasons.
Right now, we're being joined by a sociologist, Dr. Suleiman Barnabas, and Abba Owoicho, who is a student at Benue State University and is the national coordinator of the National Association of Nigerian Students. Thank you, both of you, for joining us on Newsnight tonight. First off, I mean, it would be nice, of course, to hear from the student how this 6-month-old strike has impacted on them. But let's hear from you. I mean, you're a sociologist. Following the goings-on, with ASU, government seemingly, grandstanding, ASU saying, no, we're not, giving an inch. We know about all of that. But what about the wider picture? The impact on the students, the university economies themselves, the mental health, and, the sociological impact of this ASU strike?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's unfortunate that we have a government, a leadership that is in place in this country, and have become so insensitive, irresponsible, to the plight of our citizens, and in this context, the Nigerian students. I find it very, very sad that we have presidents, a president in this context now, governors, ministers, who are not showing, the kind of urgency that they need to show in addressing this problem. It speaks a lot about how responsive and even responsible our leaders are when it comes to solving the problems of the common man. And it's so unfortunate. I sympathize with Nigerian students, I sympathize with the parents of these students, and I hope that a final solution that is beneficial to the students, is reached at the end of the day.
We're all hopeful for that, but at the end of the day, let's go back to the question that Ngozi asked you earlier. You are a sociologist, a doctor for that matter. We're looking at beyond, what is going on between ASU and the government. We're looking at the impact of this on the social lives of not just the students, but also the lecturers and generally education in Nigeria. And at the end of the day, the far-reaching implication of this prolonged strike.
You see, the implication of the neglect of education, is telling on us. First, the kind of leadership that we have in this country. And that tells you that the degree of, importance of values that our leadership places on education is a reflection of the realities that bedevil the Nigerian populace. You see, when you have people who themselves cannot say that it is education that has brought them to where they are, then the level of importance that you place in education become obvious. Now we see the same leaders when they have political challenges. You see the resources, the energy, the urgency with which they address political issues. But when it comes to education for 7 months, it tells on not just the fact that we have students who are not educated, because when we're talking about education, it's not just about the academic aspects, the moral aspects, you know, engaging people who become resourceful. But in this case, you have people that are waiting that as soon as ASUU strike is over, within 2 weeks or a month, they are writing exams and then they get promoted. And so you have people who have certificates, but they don't have that skills, that knowledge, you know, that value that education is supposed to actually impact on the people.
Do you think Nigeria, how much more the universities themselves, the students, the lecturers can recover from the impact of this long strike? And it's not just this particular strike. There have been so many. I mean, we've lost count of, you know, strikes since 1999, about 16 strikes. Can the university system even recover? And we're trying to find out from you exactly what the impact really is. I mean, if I were a student, or if you were, and you had to stay at home for 6 months without even having an idea, you know, when you'll go back to school. Yeah, what will happen to my mental state? Yeah, am I even likely to go back to school, you know, whenever the schools resume? And all of those,
in fact, many of them have already, you know, relocated out of the country.
Right.
Some have transferred. Those whose parents can afford it have transferred to private schools. But what should bother you and I is the fact that you have a government that seem not to be so concerned. I mean, by action, not by words. For 7 months, you have students, some of them have died. You know, I mean, you hear some parents complain that, I mean, just yesterday, we saw some students who were said to have you know, engaged in a pool party, nakedness, and all this kind of. You see,
well, all right. Let's put you on hold.
Dr. Barnabas, you're still with us because at the end of the day, we have to look at its far-reaching implications on every aspect of the lives of everyone involved.
All right, welcome back. You're still watching Newsnight. We have Dr. Suleiman Barnabas, a sociologist, helping us to unpack and understand the sociological impact of this ASUU strike in its 6th month now. And we're being joined by Abba Owoicho, a student of the Benue State University. I'm told we have him now. If we can establish contact with him. Okay, it looks like we don't have Abba.
Well,
okay, we do have him. Okay, great, fantastic. Abba, you're a student of Benue State University. It would be nice to hear from you. I mean, you are the most directly impacted by this long, perennial strikes by ASUU, whether it's this one we're talking about or previous ASUU strikes. How has this impacted you? In what way as a student?
Yeah, thank you for having me. The last time I was here, same question was asked, and I want to give the same answer. For every reasonable human being, you plan your life within a time frame and the things you want to do. I see myself being retarded, and I feel that every Nigerian student currently feels the same way. That a program that is meant to take you 4 or 5 years is now taking you 6 or 7 years, as the case may be. It's quite unfortunate that destinies have been held down. I listened carefully to the doc when he was making his presentation from the sociological point of view. As a student leader, we've seen a situation where our students engage in social vices. We see them roaming the street of Nigeria. We see them engage in one form of crime or the other. This is because their schools are shut. And as students, if you're not careful, this wind of negativity can blow you. And so for me as a student, I feel retarded. I feel disappointed in my country. I feel unhappy because my life, my plans has been frustrated by the prevailing ASUU strike over the years.
Well, let's come back and speak to Dr. Barnabas. Of course, Owoicho will come back to you. Dr. Barnabas, this popular saying, a country that fails in education has woefully failed in everything. As it stands, we have the highest burden of out-of-school children in the world. And here we are, 7 months going into that now. Our tertiary institutions are still under lock and key. Let's talk about the impact on education generally and the quality of the education that the students do get. Like we said earlier on, students in about 16 years lost over 4 years due to incessant strikes. Impact on education, looking at the world ranking, the only Nigerian university that you see comes at far 1,000 plus when you look at the top universities in the world. Let's talk about this strikes and its implication on our educational system and the kind of graduates that we churn out.
That we're churning out.
Well, it's clear. I mean, when you have strike, it means that students will be in the classrooms. And just like ASU is making arguments for revisiting the classes that they should have held, that means that they are going to rush these students, you know, define the curriculum. And then, so you have a situation where the emphasis is not on what these students are learning in the context of skills, knowledge acquisition, and even moral values. The emphasis now is that when will they graduate? And so when ASU comes back, what they will do is to ensure that they do a crash program for these students. So that tells on the quality of graduates that we have. And if that's the situation, it becomes difficult for our graduates to be able to compete with other graduates whose educational, you know, journey have not been interrupted by any form of strike.
Right. Okay, let's go back to the students. I mean, just like you said, you've been asked the question over and over again how this has impacted on you. But how have you been keeping yourself busy? And I'd like to add positively busy in the course of this 6 months, and we hope it comes to an end sooner than later, talking about the strike. And I'd like to also hear your thoughts. I mean, the federal government only today had meetings with the vice chancellors and pro-chancellors of federal universities, and has also said it will revisit the no work, no pay policy of the federal government. Does that even give you any hope?
Yeah, it does. For the first time in a long time, I think the federal government is becoming responsive and listening to the yearnings of Nigerians who reasonably feel that the no work, no pay policy was actually unfair. If you ask me, you don't frustrate people to that point. I'm not holding brief for ASU, but I also feel that the only way they can make their demands met is to have down tools. I've said that over and over. Over every opportunity I have, I tell people that. Now, having said that, I think this will go a long way to resolve the current crisis. And I also want to plead with the federal government that this should not be another avenue of window dressing issues where if one thing is settled, the strike is called off, and then we go back to the classroom, and within a short time, we are back at home again. Now, I want a long-lasting solution this time around, and I want to appeal to ASU as well. I have said in several fora that ASU have every right to go on strike where there is a breach of agreement, as they have said. Be that as it may, I also want them to look at it from the perspective of being parents. If the federal government has failed in their aspect of governance and keeping to their words, I want ASU to passionately view the effect this strike is having on the Nigerian student. For us, our parents are not in government, so we cannot afford education outside the country. In the end, we are there at the receiving end, the masses. These people, they don't care if the universities are short because how many of their children are here? And so, my plea to ASU, now that the federal government has offered to go and revisit the no work, no pay policy, I want them to go back to classes while negotiation continues. We will continue to support them as students because if not for ASU, some of the projects we have on our campuses today won't be there. So it is quite understandable that they are embarking on the strike they have now. So now that the federal government has listened to the voice of reasoning from Nigerians, including NLC and student bodies, as well as parents, I want to beg and plead with ASU to please consider the plight of the Nigerian child whose future is being tampered with. Not the future of the children or the politician. No, they don't care. But ASU should, at this point, come to our aid.
Well, Abba, you're saying ASU should be a bit more considerate. And I want to bring in Dr. Barnabas into this conversation again. Well, beyond revisiting the no work, no pay, which, you know, the federal government before now had actually insisted that that would stay. The fact that we've seen the government even suggest an increment of about 23.5% for every lecturer, but those who are at the professor level, they get about 35%. Do you think, you know, with this and other, you know, changes that we've seen in terms of the negotiation, especially tilting towards ASU's demand, do you think ASU should be reconsiderate in terms of its stance that it is not going back to the classroom until all of its demands are met? Middle ground here.
Yes, of course, I have never supported ASU's decision to go on strike, because the job of a lecturer is not just teaching. There's research and there's community service. And each time ASU wants to, you know, react to government failures, what they always do is to decide to go on strike by not teaching. So I would suggest, you know, first and foremost that they should resume class while these negotiations are on. But beyond that, subsequently, if ASU has any grounds with the government, it's better that they, you know, go on strike, in quote now, or suspend activities such as research and community development, and then continue with class. Because their argument that they are still working is just that they are not teaching shows that it is the students who are actually the real victims of their decision.
Right. Let me stay with you, Doctor. Is ASU fighting or making way too many demands? Yes, 5 major demands that it has made: earned allowances, revitalization of the universities, and all of that. And some analysts actually say that ASU is going beyond, you know, its job description, if I could put it that way. Asking for welfare for lecturers, yes, it's within ASU's purview. But when you talk about fighting for improved standards of education, that it is within the purview of the Ministry of Education and maybe the Universities Commission, the NUC. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I think that ASU is not even, the demands of ASU are not, you know, exorbitant. I would have even expected more demands. You know why? Right. Because it's not just about salaries. If you don't have the right condition of learning for students to learn, then the impact, the effect will be on our educational system. How do you imagine a situation where our doctors live here and, you know, to other countries, and they tell them to go and start from 400 level or whatever this is? So all I want to say is that if NUC and the Ministry of Education are not doing their job, ASU, who is also a stakeholder in the educational system of the country, is doing the right thing by saying government must act. However, it shouldn't be going on strike, dropping the shock, if you want me to use that word now. It should be other ways of engaging government rather than putting the students' destiny on the line.
Right, and let's speak to Abba real quick now as we get ready to wrap up this conversation. Well, the country, we are dealing with a plethora of issues, and of course insecurity will be the one that a lot of people will talk about. That is a major challenge facing the nation right now, and we've been able to see a nexus between education, that's a connection between education and insecurity. As we wrap this up right now, what would be your appeal to the #1 citizen as it concerns this strike that has taken up to 7 months of your life?
Well, thank you. I would want to remind Mr. President that in 2015, during the electioneering campaigns, he made a plea to Nigeria to make education, one, qualitative, affordable, and then competitive with other countries of the world. I only want to appeal to him to go in line with his promises to Nigerians. It was a social contract, actually, if you ask me. He promised to make education viable. This strike is negating his promise to Nigerian and Nigerian students. He got the overwhelming support of Nigerian students because there was a promise he made to us, and I would not want him to renege on that promise. And it is long overdue for him to stamp his feet and correct the ills in the educational sector as he has promised. If you ask me, he has people who are not competent handling the educational sector of Nigeria. And so to start with, I will rather ask for their sack with immediate effect, and then he should personally have a roundtable discussion with the leadership of ASUU in a bid to finding long-lasting solution to this crisis that has kept the Nigerian education in a shambles.
All right, thank you very much for that one. Abba Owoicho is of the Benue State University. Thank you very much. A national coordinator of NANS. We've also been speaking with Dr. Suleiman Barnabas, a sociologist, looking at all of these issues with us. It is a continuing conversation on the ASUU, and hope things, move in the right direction sooner than later. Thank you, all of you, gentlemen.